The Battle of Baton Rouge was a brief siege during the Anglo-Spanish War that was decided on September 21, 1779. Baton Rouge was the second British outpost to fall to Spanish arms during Bernardo de Galvez's march into British West Florida. Background: Spain officially entered the American Revolutionary War on May 8, 1779, with a formal declaration of war by King Charles III. This declaration was followed by another on July 8 that authorized his colonial subjects to engage in hostilities against the British. When Bernardo de Galvez, the colonial governor of Spanish Louisiana, received word of this on July 21, he immediately began to plan offensive operations to take British West Florida. Fort Butte on August 27, Galvez set out by land toward Baton Rouge, leading a force that consisted of 520 regulars, of whom about two-thirds were recent recruits, 60 militiamen, 80 free blacks and mulattoes, and 10 American volunteers headed by Oliver Pollock. As they marched upriver, the force grew by another 600 men, including Indians and Acadians. At its peak, the force numbered over 1,400. But this number was reduced due to the hardships of the march by several hundred before they reached Fort Butte. At dawn on September 7, this force attacked Fort Butte, a decaying relic of the French and Indian War that was defended by a token force. After a brief skirmish in which one German was killed, most of the garrison surrendered. The 6 who escaped capture made their way to Baton Rouge to notify the British troops there of the fort's capture. After several days' rest, Galvez advanced on Baton Rouge, only 15 miles from Fort Butte. When Galvez arrived at Baton Rouge on September 12, he found a well-fortified town garrisoned by over 400 regular army troops and 150 militia under the overall command of Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Dixon. The troops consisted of British Army regulars from the 16th and 60th Regiments, as well as some artillerymen, and several companies of Germans from the 3rd Waldeck Regiment. British defences. Dixon had decided weeks earlier that Fort Butte, built in 1766 and in ruins, was not defensible, and had placed most of his troops at Baton Rouge. Beginning in July 1779, he directed the construction of Fort New Richmond. This fortification was an earthen redoubt with chevrons de frise on the outside. It was surrounded by a moat 18 feet wide and 9 feet deep, and fortified with 13 cannons. Battle. Galvez first sent a detachment of men further up the river to break communications between Baton Rouge and British sites further upriver. Before the fort he was unable to directly advance his own artillery, so Galvez ordered a feint to the north through a wooded area, sending a detachment of his poorly trained militia to create disturbances in the forest. The British turned and unleashed mass volleys at this body, but the Spanish forces, shielded by substantial foliage, suffered only 3 casualties. While this went on, Galvez dug siege trenches and established secure gun pits within musket range of the fort. He placed his artillery pieces there, opening fire on the fort on September 21. The British endured 3 hours of shelling before Dixon offered to surrender. Galvez demanded and was granted terms that included the capitulation of the 80 regular infantry at Fort Panmure, a well-fortified position that would have been difficult for Galvez to take militarily. Dixon surrendered 375 regular troops the next day. Galvez had Dixon's militia disarmed and sent home. Galvez then sent a detachment of 50 men to take control of Panmure. He also dismissed his own militia companies, left a sizable garrison at Baton Rouge, and returned to New Orleans with about 50 men. Aftermath. When informed that Dixon had surrendered Fort Panmure, its commander was irate, believing Dixon had surrendered Panmure to get better terms of surrender. Isaac Johnson, a local justice of the peace, wrote that, in the mighty battle between Governor Galvez and Colonel Dixon, the Spaniards only lost 1 man and some say not 1. The English lost 25 and the commanding officer wounded his head on his tea table. The victory at Baton Rouge cleared the Mississippi River entirely of British forces and put the lower reaches of the river firmly under Spanish control. Within a few days of Galvez's victory, American and Spanish privateers captured several British supply ships on Lake Pontchartrain, including the remarkable capture of 1 ship carrying 54 Waldecker troops and 10 to 12 sailors by a sloop crewed by 14 native Louisianans. Galvez was promoted to brigadier general for his successful campaign, and his exploits were immortalized in the poetry of Julian Poydras. He immediately began planning an expedition against Mobile and Pensacola, the remaining British strongholds in West Florida, which would culminate in the capture of Pensacola, the West Florida capital, in 1781. Baton Rouge remained in Spanish hands for the rest of the war, and Britain ceded both West and East Florida to Spain in the 1783 Treaty of Paris. It would not become American territory until 1810.